Welcome back to the channel, where today we're going to be having a look at my 1 to 1200 naval collection. Now, these are all ships for the Napoleonic period, although could go slightly earlier than that as well, because a number of the vessels had relatively long service lives and so served in prior conflicts as well, but it has Napoleonic chiefly in mind. Now, the miniatures that I've chosen for the collection are all Langton Miniatures, so they're white metal hulls, and predominantly at the moment, whilst the masts are also white metal, they have brass etched sails in at least the first batch, but I've also bought a small number of moulded white metal sails as well to experiment with those, although they'll probably be harder to pin together and keep in place because of the weight, which is why I went for the brass etched to begin with, and whilst a little bit fiddly to sort of cut out of the sprues and affix and paint, actually well worth it in the end. So on that topic, I went the whole hog in terms of the Langton Miniatures experience, if you like, and which those of you that enjoy this period and scale of miniature may well be familiar with, because I also purchased their brass-etched ratlines for the sides of the ships, as I'll show in more detail later on. And all the other sundry bits and pieces as well, so even the flags in this case have been bought from Langton's, and I also the little boats that are being towed behind, the different types of cutters or pinnaces or whatever that have been put over the back prior to action, those are also from Langton's range as well. And I must say I commend their customer service and patience with me, as I, whilst interested in the period, was not necessarily hugely knowledgeable. In any case, what you see before you are just half a dozen of the ships. I have a number more still to do. I did most of these back in the summer, actually. It's been a couple of months or so since I've worked on any. And initially we've got at the front here 3 British ships of the line, 3 battleships, and then 3 they're Franco-Spanish ships at the back there. So on the left-hand side here, you've got the 112-gun Spanish ship of the line, and then 2 basically identical French 74s. In the centre and right. They're differentiated by the fact that their hulls have been painted in slightly different colour schemes. Now, I'd never done anything like this before, although I had seen the miniatures themselves many years ago. And I think, if I'm remembering rightly, I can't remember which one I started with first actually now. It was either the British 96 or 98 gun vessel, or it was the 112, and I did that because I read somewhere that it was probably best, if you were going to venture into this period, to start with a larger ship first rather than a tiny frigate. The reason being, the smaller the vessel, the more fiddly it is, and obviously these are quite small already. I mean, you can see roughly speaking how large they are just next to my hand. If I put that into the screen, these are quite small. I mean, even the largest ship's going to fit in the palm of one's hand. Thusly. So I started with the largest ships first, and I'm glad I did, because indeed the rigging process, which is probably the aspect which would strike the greatest level of fear into those of us venturing into the period, was complicated and fiddly to begin with. Now, what I'll say is that I used Langton's own guide, which hopefully will fit into the camera here. Nope. Not quite close enough. There we go. So you can get this from Langton's, their guide to assembly, painting, rigging, etc. It's very, very good and very, very helpful, and takes you through all the steps, for the purposes of which we'll just quickly delve into it. So this is the guide. Now, as you can see, there's a little bit of errata actually that's been introduced into it as well. But it takes you through all the different steps of needing to put these little ships together. So introduction, initial assembly, it describes the sail settings to you, it takes you through a fairly comprehensive painting guide with some suggestions, and there are some colour illustrations in it as well. And then basing, varnishing, there's the illustrations page. And then rigging, so you can get more or less complicated with these as well, and I will say I haven't gone the whole hog, as it were, on them. And then finishing touches such as the flags and the bases. So as an example, there you go, this is describing to you the different sail settings. As you go through, a suggestion on how you might go about painting them. And then it breaks down each different part of the ship with handy diagrams to show you which bits it's talking about, and gives you a general description of what colour they might have been, and talks through the differences and discrepancies perhaps between different nations' styling on these kind of ships. It's usually leading with the British, but does talk about other nations as well, and some of the ambiguity in these things as well. As once you start reading into it, you realise that actually the sort of classical colour schemes you might associate with the British were found on other ships and vice versa, and everybody captured each other's ships, and it was what paint was available in real life and so on. But anyway, these are all the different sections of the ships, talking about those things, and then some colour illustrations with some descriptions of which nation this might have belonged to, what period, and perhaps even if it was just a whole colour scheme specific to a certain engagement or campaign as well. And this did give me some inspiration for painting my own vessels as well. And then the rigging. So the rigging, it takes you through it in detail. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3, the different sections, specialist knots, anything you might need in order to get these chaps rigged up. So if you're going to delve into this, I highly recommend it. It was very useful to me. Lots of useful information in it, as you can see, right down to different ways of doing flags and so on at the end there. So, back to the miniatures. There we go. Now, be able to see, I have done a certain amount of rigging on all of these different vessels, but what I have done is I've stopped at just what's called the standing rigging, which is, as you can see here, using black thread and following the Langton guide on how to rig these ships. I will say, for the eagle-eyed amongst you that might be looking at these, occasionally I've had to take liberties on where I could put the thread through or which point I had the thread meet to, based on just the difficulty and complexity of getting around the miniatures. It does suggest, drilling with pin vise holes in certain parts of the masts to get the thread through for the rigging, and I haven't done that in some cases. I've just sort of fudged it because you can't quite see it anyway. What I did do is I did drill out where the masts themselves were going to fit into as suggested, and I did drill the holes in the sides here where you can see the thread going through in order to run them through and loop them back on one another. But as I say, certain liberties were taken in the course of assembling these miniatures, so you'll have to forgive me. What hasn't been placed on them is the running rigging, which is yet more thread that would have to go on a slightly different colour to represent the fact that that rigging was a slightly different colour. The standing rigging was tarred, I think, to weatherproof it, which is why it looks sort of black or very dark black brown. And the running rigging was, I think it's suggested to use a shade of brown for that. But I just thought that it might be pushing things a little stretch too far, for my taste personally, and would have made the miniatures a little bit busy perhaps. What I have done after rigging them is I've just matte varnished them in my accustomed way, fitted the flags and sort of moulded them into shapes. They are, I did manage to avoid the pitfall of the fact that obviously the sail sets, the vessels are going forwards, the flags are not going the opposite direction. However, when they're head to head like this, it's slightly artificial, but it works. It works that way around, clearly. And then what I've done is I've placed them on the resin bases that are supplied by Langton's as well, so I got those from them. But then I've put them on a 2mm MDF base as well, and drilled some magnet holes in the bottom of each, so that these will be able to clamp nicely down onto a sheet metal inside an appropriate storage box, so they can sort of move around in great comfort. Because one thing that you want to do is, I think, go that extra bit of distance to protect these once you've done them, because they're fairly robust and put in, and the rigging is designed in such a way as to create tensile strength that supports the masts and everything else. But if you drop these, or you shake them around in a box, or something falls on them, it's going to cause fairly catastrophic damage that will be upsetting, to say the least, before you then go about repairing it. However, anyway, after getting past the first one, and the rigging took some time as I painstakingly followed the process, I actually found, as you tend to do with all kinds of modelling and other hobby projects, is you get quicker as you go along. So as I moved on to, start off with a bigger ship, okay, that's fine. So I've got through a 96 gun, that's That's okay, fair enough. I sort of manoeuvre my fingers around that. Next, okay, let's try a 74, and then let's try a 64. And what I haven't got around to yet is frigates. I 100% heartily recommend some of the tools that are suggested that you use in the guide and are suggested elsewhere online. A pair of tweezers, a nice pair of thin tweezers. I can't count how many times that was useful in just pushing the thread through a gap or grabbing it from where the thread was just struggling to come out of one of the tiny pin vise holes that have been drilled in the gunwales or the bulkheads and things like that. Just able to nip the end of that thread and pull it through, or when tying knots and passing it through itself to grab it and pull it out the other side. Tweezers do it. And also something like a cocktail stick or something with a sharp point to just dab tiny bits of super glue into places, so you're not trying to place a nozzle on there, because that just isn't going to work. You're going to drown the thing in super glue. So there we go, like cocktail sticks and tweezers, hearty recommendations. Now, in case you're wondering what these miniatures start off looking like, well, I thought I'd show you. So these are obviously finished examples, but they start off looking like this. Popsicle sticks not included. So here's a couple of different hulls, and as you can see, I've labelled the sticks just to remember which ones they are. So it's a Spanish 74 and a French 40-gun frigate as well, and there's their relative size next to one another. Excuse me. So when you get them, they come as this piece here. They don't come all in one part, so the stern section here, that needs to be attached and glued on. I have drilled out the mast holes to enable the masts to sit in there nice and comfortably, and then hopefully you'll be able to see in the sides. I have drilled this one, have I not? Yeah, it's quite hard probably to distinguish due to the foreground background action of this camera. But I have drilled holes in the bulkheads. You might faintly be able to see them. Let's try zooming in for your benefit. Are they going to focus? Come on, focus. There you go. Right, so you should be able to pick out the holes that I've drilled in the bulkheads here and here. One at the top rear, one at the front, one through the bow, not the bowsprit, through the beak at the front there as well. That's for the threads to pass through. It is quite fiddly. You do need a very narrow pin vise. You can see from the inside of the bulkheads as well where that hole's gone through. And you can see on the frigate here, because you run out of room very quickly to put holes through, so you kind of have to fudge it. Like you can see one there's gone through what actually is a gun port. It does suggest also you drill them downwards here. So you can see I've put one through there and one above it, so that the thread will still come to the same point on the hull. So that is fiddly. I think I can't remember, it was a 0.3mm pin vise I was using initially for that. And then I tend to drill it through one side, pass the pin vise through from the inside as well, and then use the point of a needle and just push the needle through, and carefully, without breaking, because if you put a hole through this bulkhead, you've got a very thin layer of metal above it. Just rotating that needle around inside the hole from each direction, just gently, in order to make sure that it is actually the same sort of width all the way through for passing that thread through. So that's cleaning up and preparing the ship models. And then in terms of the sail sets that I was describing earlier, so you can either get them like this. So that is etched brass, and as you can see, it requires that you clip the bits off the sprue and fix them on. And then your alternative is your classic white metal, which is this. Now, these naturally are going to be heavier and harder to fix on to the masts, even with super glue. I think there's a better chance you're going to knock those off, even with the little indents to help them fix. The brass parts, as you might be able to see in the pack here, if you can cut them so that there are two little protrusions at the top here of what is the yard arm, and you can use that. What I do is I bend them down to then create a little collar or a couple of little grabbers that sit round the mast in the appropriate place to help that stay in position. And also, it being lighter, it's much less likely to sort of ping off or fall off than the heavier white metal version. Not pictured here are the ratlines, which also come in this brass form and require plinking off. What I tend to do is actually, with the ratlines, is spray them black on one side, not both sides, although you could do, because quite a lot of that rubs off anyway, then fix them in, and then I finish painting them in place. And I do that, in my case, after doing the rigging, which means manoeuvring them into place with tweezers sort of carefully. But if you were to put the brass ratlines in before the rigging, I think you'd struggle to put the rigging on. So I chose which of those is going to be more or less difficult, essentially. And so that's what they start off looking like. There's the hull, there's your mast sets, you've got your rigging, not pictured thread, I just used some black thread that I had around. You get through an awful lot, and a tip on that is, whenever it says you need a relatively long stretch of thread for a certain stage, for example, when you're passing it from the main mast and then back over itself and all the way to the front, and you've got to do multiple loops and knots and so on, always cut off more than you need. You don't want to get to one end and go, blast, I can't tie that off now, it doesn't quite reach, or something like that. Better to cut off that bit of thread, and maybe you can use that for something else than have too little. But that's it, that's what they look like, and that's what they look like finished. So for the last part of this, I'll just show you the ships up close, so you can have a little look at the finished products. Okay, so we'll go through them in sort of rough order that I can remember that I put these together. So first of all, you've got a Spanish first-rate, a 112-gun ship of the line. This, I think, because I have given myself a rough list of names of ships that I'd like these to represent. It could represent several, but in this case, it's the famous or infamous Santa Ana that I've gone for here. I've given it the yellow hull colour. Again, as I say, I sort of wasn't aware that in many respects, if you took the flags off, many of these ships might look quite similar to one another because of their different paint schemes. This isn't far off when this has got the gun ports open, looking like the sort of famous Nelson checkerboard pattern, because you just see sort of dark spaces where the guns protrude, although you can see the edges of the red gun port lids in there as well. And so that was the first ship I painted, and some of the colour scheme stuff therefore evolved as I went along and actually went back and changed a few bits. I have put the little touch of putting the small boats in, being towed behind the ship as it goes into action, because for those that aren't aware, the ship's boats, of which there were maybe several different types, depending on the size of the ship, were put over the back of the ship and dragged into action, so that they didn't provide an extra source of splinters and flying debris when the ship was struck by enemy fire that would therefore generate potentially further casualties on top of those already being suffered. So that's, I think, the first ship I did, and as you can see, there's the brass rat lines in there as well. They've been painted black and put in, and some examples of the rigging. And again, for those of you that are either perfectionist or aficionados, I can only apologise. And I say apologise. I half apologise because I knew what I was doing, and it's my collection at the end of the day. But yeah, no, I mean, I really enjoyed it. Once I got past that first bit, really enjoyed it, and I'm quite pleased, particularly actually, not just with the ships, but how the sea bases came out. The effect worked out really well, actually. The resin bases are really nice. And so yeah, that's the Santa Ana. That's 112 guns. The counterpart to this on the British side is this 98 gun ship. Now this could be one of, I think it's 4 were built in this series, and the famous painting that might spring to mind of this type of ship is of the Temeraire, although it could equally have been Neptune or one of its other sisters in the series of lines. I think this was the Neptune class, actually, now that I remember. So this could equally be HMS Neptune, and as you can see, in one sense, not a huge level of dissimilarity with that Spanish ship, apart from obviously the flags and crew and so on. So what I did do is I noted in the reading in the Langton guide that the British were pretty keen on scrubbing the decks and keeping things clean, so the deck planking is a bit brighter than on the Franco-Spanish ship. But I mean, you wouldn't necessarily notice that unless I pointed it out. It was just for my own satisfaction. Again, a couple of boats. I've just placed them randomly. One thing I didn't do is try and use thread to attach them to the ship or anything like that. That was just beyond my level of patience, frankly. But yeah, that's the 98 gun. Quite happy with that. And then to rattle through the others, so you've got a 74 gun here. I think this is the middling 74. It could represent one of a number of different ships. I think I'm normally referring to it as the Bellerophon, or the Bellerophon, depending on your pronunciation. But it could be Ajax, Colossus, one of a number of British 74s. And you can see there the yellow and black checkerboard. Bring that a bit close to the camera. We'll pan around. There's the stern. The deck detailing. And then the third British ship that I've currently got completed is this 64, which is naturally probably going to be the Agamemnon, which reputedly was Nelson's favourite ship. And yeah, it's just a smaller version of its cousins you can see on the table there, but quite smart for its own part. It's almost slightly dwarfed by its sails compared to the others, I think. But similar colour scheme to the others. All the British ships have got yellow at the moment. I'll probably do some in dark red as well, just for a bit of variation and to confuse things even more. There's that deck planking that I was referring to. And you can also see, actually, I've put different flag colours on the ships as well. So you've got white, blue and red. I mean, why not? I got all the different flags. I know it might mix them up and might have changed between engagements depending on which ship it's representing in which period or time, but again, it's just for my own amusement. So that's the Santana, and then here you've got two largely matching French 74s. You'll see that the difference here is that the one on the right hand side, the whales, which are the sort of horizontal beams or planks running along that are black, as opposed to on the left where they are red. And that's just to help distinguish one from the other. As I've already just realised, I've put their boats, small boats, in the same place as well. But yeah, a not uncommon hull scheme for the French. So this one with the black whales running along the side. A nice crisply fluttering French pennants. I'm pretty pleased these didn't sag or droop when I put them on, actually. There we go. Again, quite pleased with the sea effect. Downside to having not worked on these for a couple of months, can't quite remember the colour scheme that I used and in what order to achieve that sea effect. So we'll probably have to do a bit of experimenting in order to recreate that again. That I also just matte varnished, by the way, for those that are wondering. I'm a fan of matte varnishing things. And then this is the ship with the red whales along the side, or the all-red hull. I know there are different colours that you can put on, for example, the prow and the stern decoration. So there are a couple of ships, possibly the Spanish ones, where I'm going to go for silver banding here and there, just to break things up, make them differently, make them look a bit different. And also along things like the edges of the bulwarks, I might do different stripes of colour and things like that, just to give some variation to the collection. There you go, that's the ship front on, bearing down. Both these French ships, I think, are at topsail and jib, as opposed to the British ships, which are only they're easy sail with courses furled. So in both cases, they've got their lower sets of sails raised to prevent them catching fire, basically, in the heat of combat. And there you go, there's the other side of it. And that's it, that's the 6 ships at the moment. Actually, I should have kept going, really. Like most projects, you sort of, when you've got a bit of momentum, you perhaps should stick with it, because I've got a number of other vessels. I mean, the couple that I showed you that haven't started yet, I think I've got 10 more in total. So I've got a few more ships of the line for each side, and then a couple of frigates for each side as well. And that'll be a decently sized collection. In terms of what rules I might be using these for, well, I have got the Langton's own 4th edition of Signal Close Action, which is a supremely complicated looking rule set, but it's the kind of thing that I do have a bit of a taste for. I do like the complicated quasi-simulation rule sets. However, I also will very happily put these on the table and use the rules for GMT's flying colours, which, yes, that's a hex encounter board war game, but I have seen examples of people using those rules with miniatures before, and I would very happily do that with these. It's a great and easy to use rule set, and I think would suit these quite nicely with a little bit of sort of modification for using on the tabletop. And yeah, so those are the two that I'll probably go for, one of which is perhaps going to cause a little bit more pain for signal close action, but I'll probably try that only with a couple of ships as opposed to flying colours, which I'd comfortably put half a dozen to a dozen ships or more for each side down and play through. Anyway, that's all I can think of really to say about this collection for now. I just thought it would be of interest. I know there are some people out there that are very, very strong enthusiasts for this type of miniature and this period of gaming, certainly. So this is my small contribution to that particular community. I am looking forward to doing some more of these in the hopefully near future. But then I say that about every project because, as many of us do, we cycle between different things. Appreciate any thoughts, comments, queries, comebacks. There will be things, no doubt, after I finish this that I think, oh, I wish I'd mentioned that or talked about this, but this video is already probably running on a little bit long, and I'm not sure how interested in my endless ramblings people actually are, as is also deliberately actually a bit more unstructured, just to allow me to talk with a little bit more enthusiasm and a little less roboticism about my miniatures. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope everybody's enjoying their own hobby as well, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.